The police storm into the Miller household and find Jamie, a teenager, terrified in his bed. He's already wet himself out of fear. He's arrested on suspicion of murder, and the officers begin to search the house for a weapon. At the station, Jamie asks for a lawyer and chooses his father, Eddie, as the responsible adult to accompany him. While Jamie's in his cell, the family waits. Eventually, Eddie's called in to be with his son during the strip search, blood draw, and DNA sample collection, which deeply frustrates him. The lawyer, Paul, is assigned to the case. When he meets Jamie, he asks what his favorite subject is, and the boy replies, the Industrial Revolution. He then explains why a particular historical figure is his favorite, giving well-reasoned justifications. The lawyer later accompanies Jamie and Eddie during the interrogation, with officers Bascom and Frank. There, they are informed that Jamie has been charged with the murder of Kate, a 14-year-old girl, the night before. Jamie firmly denies it. The police then show conflicting messages between Jamie and Katie on Instagram, and finally present the most damning evidence: security camera footage showing Jamie following Katie through town until they reach a parking lot where he confronts her and stabs her multiple times. The recording shatters Eddie, who breaks down in tears as he comes face to face with what his son has done. Later on, the officers go to Jamie and Katie's school, searching for the murder weapon and trying to understand the motive behind the crime. There, they meet Jamie's best friends, Ryan and Tommy, and it's clear that the case has become the main topic of the school. They interrogate Jade, Katie's best friend, but she's very upset, though she hints that Katie hated Jamie. The officers enter a classroom and ask the students for any information about the knife, as the security footage showed Jamie passing through that area on the night of the crime, and they suspect he might have hidden it at the school. One of the students, mocking, asks if they have the video of the attack. No one else says anything, so Bascom leaves his card in case anyone wants to talk. Miss Fenimore accompanies them during the visit and tells them she used to teach Katie, who used to be very bright and full of potential. As they walk through the school, they notice that several teachers are having trouble with their students, one even saying they're impossible to manage. They visit another classroom where Bascom's son, Adam, is present, and the detective witnesses him being bullied. Just as the detective is about to ask questions about the crime, the fire alarm goes off and the school is evacuated. In the chaos, Jade attacks Ryan and accuses him of killing her friend, calling him a freak. A teacher pulls her away while Ryan, on the ground, wipes the blood from his face. A classmate mocks him for being hit by a girl. Bascom goes to the nurse's office to find Ryan and tries to earn his trust by telling him that as a kid, he once gave himself a black eye by accident. Ryan replies that at least he was popular. Bascom asks if being popular matters to him, and Ryan says it does. Bascom then starts asking questions about Jamie. Ryan says he didn't know what Jamie was planning and doesn't think they were really friends. Meanwhile, a calmer Jade confides in the teacher that Katie was the only one who truly accepted her, and now she doesn't know what to do. The teacher tries to comfort her and says they'll find someone for her to talk to, but Jade becomes upset and walks away. Later, Adam finds his father and asks to speak privately. He tells him the investigation isn't moving forward because he's not understanding what's going on. He shows him the messages between Jamie and Katie on Instagram and explains that she was cryptically calling him an incel using emojis. Adam explains to his father that 80% of women are only attracted to 20% of men, and that men have to deceive them because it's the only way to get their attention. Bascom responds that Jamie is only 13. How could he be an incel? Adam insists that Katie was basically telling him he would always be an incel, that he would die a virgin, and that the hearts in that comment came from people who agreed with her. Worried, Bascom asks his son if that kind of thing on Instagram affects him. Adam replies that it doesn't, but also points out that his father never calls him son, even though he calls others that. Later, Bascom speaks with Officer Frank and Miss Fenimore about the term incel. Frank recognizes it from an influencer named Andrew Tate, and Fenimore says that she's heard her students mention him. Now, what is the incel community? Let me explain it in more detail. The word incel comes from involuntary celibate, referring to people who claim they are unable to have a romantic or sexual relationship, even though they want one. At its origin, it was simply an online community to talk about that experience, but over time, the concept took a much darker turn. Today, in 2025, when we talk about the incel movement, we're referring to online forums filled with hate, misogyny, and in some cases, even violence. What's most concerning is this phenomenon is resonating with many young people around the world, and that forces us to ask, why is this happening? Why does such a discourse connect with so many teenagers and young men? To try to understand it, we first need to look at what this ideology actually proposes. Incels believe that society is structured like a kind of genetic pyramid, where a person's value, especially men, is determined almost exclusively by physical appearance, height, jawline, ethnicity, body type, etc. At the top are the Chads, tall, attractive, muscular men who supposedly can have any woman they want, and the Stacys, beautiful, popular women who only go for Chads. Below them are the Normies, average people, and at the very bottom of the pyramid are the Incels, who say they've been condemned to total rejection because they don't meet these physical standards. In their view, women choose partners solely based on looks. They don't care about personality, effort, or emotional connection. And under this logic, women become the ones to blame for their suffering. They are seen as the enemy. Sometimes this doesn't just remain an idea. Some have turned to violent action. One of the most well-known cases is Elliot Rodger, a young man who in 2014 killed 6 people in California before taking his own life. In his more than 100-page manifesto, he spoke of his hatred towards women, whom he described as beasts who shouldn't have the right to choose a partner. For him, in an ideal society, women would have no voice or freedom. They're just objects to serve male desire. What's most disturbing is that within incel forums, Rodger has been turned into sort of a martyr. Some users use his photo as their profile picture. They call him the patron saint. And the fact that this is happening in spaces visited by thousands of boys on the internet is alarming. Now, of course, not everyone who is drawn to this discourse ends up committing a crime. But the fact that more and more young people are identifying with this narrative already tells us something. And that is where I want to dig a little deeper. Why do so many young people feel this speaks to them? There isn't a single answer, but after reading several of these forums and reflecting on what I've heard in some cases, I believe there are a few key points to highlight. In recent years, and rightfully so, there has been a strong critique of traditional masculinity. The idea of the strong, dominant, invulnerable man who never cries, never breaks down, and always has to handle everything. It's a necessary critique, no doubt, but what was left afterward in many cases was a void. A lot of boys heard everything they shouldn't be, but didn't find a clear answer about what they can be. We've pointed out what needs to be deconstructed, but haven't always provided a clear alternative for how to exist in the world as a man today. And in the face of that void, many feel lost. They feel guilty for things they don't fully understand, or feel judged simply for being male. At home, they often don't find guidance either. For various reasons, work, stress, emotional exhaustion, lack of tools, many fathers aren't fully present. And when parenting is left to screens, those boys are left adrift, vulnerable to any narrative that makes them feel seen, validated, or understood. And without emotional tools, spaces for dialogue, and close role models showing them a different kind of masculinity, some end up falling into discourse like that of the incels, because at least it offers them a sense of meaning. It tells them their anger is valid and that they're not alone. And that, when someone feels abandoned, ridiculed, or judged, can be very appealing, even if it is dangerous. As problematic as this ideology is, there's one thing I think it manages to do. It validates the suffering of many boys. Many movements, rightfully so, have brought visibility to historical injustices that have profoundly affected women. But in that process, some men have felt that their pain is dismissed. But the truth is, some men suffer. Boys who don't fit into what is expected of them, who feel inadequate, rejected, abandoned, who live in isolation, under pressure, confused, who don't really know what is expected of them as men. And if the only place where someone talks to them about that is a misogynistic influencer or a hate-filled forum, well, that's where they end up. Because at least there, someone tells them they're right to feel bad. And I want to make this very clear. I'm not justifying the incel ideology. Far from it. What I'm trying to do is understand where it comes from, and above all, extend an invitation to listen more and judge less. Because if every time someone tries to talk about their pain, all they receive is mockery or indifference, they're likely to shut down, become defensive, isolate themselves, and begin to build up anger and resentment. And when that happens, there's no longer space for dialogue. This isn't about competing over who has suffered more or denying any struggle. It's about opening a more empathetic conversation where someone's pain doesn't erase another's, where we can listen without invalidating, simply with the intention of understanding each other a little better. That's why I believe what we need is greater reconciliation, to begin taking seriously the wounds that many men carry without dismissing them or minimizing what they feel. Because if we don't create spaces where everyone can speak without fear of being judged, those voids will continue to be filled by dangerous narratives. And those narratives, instead of building something new, only feed more anger, hatred, isolation, and violence. Bascom returns to the classroom to interrogate Ryan, but he escapes through the window. Bascom chases after him and eventually catches up. Ryan confesses that the knife was his and he gave it to Jamie to scare her. Ryan is arrested on conspiracy to commit murder, and Bascom asks Frank to proceed with formally charging Jamie, as they now have everything they need, even without having found the weapon. Bascom tries to connect with his son and invites him to eat. Adam hesitates, but Bascom tells him he has free time and wants to spend it with him. He also says that he loves him. Adam agrees and they leave together. Meanwhile, Eddie goes to the parking lot where Katie was murdered and leaves flowers at a small memorial. 7 months after Katie's death, the psychologist Bryony is sent to evaluate Jamie in order to understand why Jamie killed her. Since there was no space in standard detention centers, Jamie was placed in a mental health facility filled with constant screaming, where he had recently been involved in a physical fight. Before starting the session, Bryony prepares hot chocolate with marshmallows because she knows Jamie likes it. A guard remarks that she is the first person to ever take the boy seriously. Bryony begins her 5th session with Jamie, who smiles when he sees the hot chocolate. She also gives him half a cheese and pickle sandwich, though Jamie says he hates pickles. Bryony tries to talk about the male figures in his family. Jamie says his grandfather is like his dad, and that both are just men. When she asks if, when he hears the word masculine, he pictures someone who fixes things, likes to watch sports, and goes to the pub, he says yes, though he clarifies that his dad doesn't go to pubs and that he doesn't see his grandfather very often. When Bryony tries to pursue the topic further, Jamie becomes irritated. He says that before, she used to ask if he could tell right from wrong, and now she's just talking nonsense. Bryony manages to calm him down and returns to the topic of Eddie. Jamie says his dad fixes toilets, works a lot, is sometimes funny, but not affectionate. He's never hit him, though one time he knocked down a shed out of rage. He chose him as the responsible adult because he's kind and doesn't judge him. When he's not working, Eddie likes all kinds of sports, but Jamie doesn't. He's not interested, and he even pretends to be in pain to skip physical education. He remembers his dad used to take him to play football. Eddie would cheer him on, but when Jamie messed up, he'd look away, maybe to hide his embarrassment. Bryony says she wasn't good at sports either, but Jamie replies that at least she was smart and good at other things. He doesn't think he's good at anything, though he claims not to care. He says most people think that they're bad at everything anyway. At this point, we can already begin to understand a few things about Jamie that help us start to interpret his behavior. Adolescence is a stage in which children gradually begin to detach from their parents. They no longer depend on them the way they did in childhood and start searching for their own path, their own way of seeing the world. It's a period of discovery, of great confusion, but also of construction. Teenagers begin to ask themselves who they are and where they belong. In that search for identity, adolescents are influenced by everything around them. Family, school, the law, and culture in general all transmit ideas about what is supposedly valuable, desirable, correct, what's acceptable to be, and what is not. But not everyone can fit into those expectations. Many teenagers feel out of place, rejected, invisible, lost. And that's exactly what seems to be happening to Jamie. At home, Jamie already carries a sense of powerlessness and not being enough. He admires his father, but also feels like he's a disappointment, that he embarrasses him and falls short of what was expected of him. Later, we'll find out that Eddie used to take him to play football, believing it would make him stronger. Then he enrolled him in boxing. But Jamie isn't that kind of boy. He's not interested in sports, and he's not good at them. What he really liked was drawing, and he was good at it, but no one gave it much importance. So over time, he gave it up. At school, the story isn't much different. Jamie and his friends are marginalized, bullied. They don't feel attractive or popular or wanted by girls. That feeling of helplessness keeps growing heavier. And it's precisely in that state of vulnerability that the incel narrative starts to become appealing. And here's a theme I find particularly interesting and very well presented by the series. If you watch closely, you'll notice that beyond Jamie's individual case, what we're seeing is a kind of X-ray of the failure of the institutions that have historically been fundamental in shaping identity: family, school, and the law. For a long time, those three institutions were the pillars of a person's development. They were the places where values were taught, where people learned how to live together, to understand right from wrong, to discover who they were and who they could become. But what the series shows is that today, those institutions are being overwhelmed by technology and by the influence of social media. In the family, for example, we see parents who, though not bad people, fail to truly understand their children. Eddie and Bascom love their sons, that is clear. but they don't really know them. They don't know what they do, what they're like, or what they're afraid of. There is love, but also a vast emotional distance. At school, something similar is happening. The teachers are completely overwhelmed. Some no longer even try to understand the students. They're just trying to survive the daily chaos. Others pretend everything is fine, when in reality, they don't know how to relate to a generation that lives in a world entirely foreign to them. And then there's the law. Through Jamie's case, it collided with a violent world where the old rules no longer apply. Whereas in the past, kids were shaped by what they saw at home, what they learned in school, or what society tried to uphold as the norm. Today, the main force shaping identity is the internet. Social media has become the new arena where personal value, acceptance, desirability, visibility, and self-esteem are all played out. And the problem is that these platforms are designed to capture attention, to generate addiction, to push everything to the extreme. Everything becomes binary. You either like it or you don't. You're either popular or a loser. And in that environment, any teenager who doesn't fit in, who feels insecure, alone, or simply confused, as Jamie did, can easily fall into dangerous narratives. So yes, the series is also speaking to us about a generation growing up in the middle of a storm of stimuli, without maps, without compasses, and with very few adult hands that know how to guide them, because the institutions that once fulfilled that role are losing the battle. And this isn't to say it's over, there's nothing we can do, nor to fall into the nostalgia of the past was better. No, it's about recognizing that the world has changed, that teenagers are growing up in an entirely different landscape, and that if we don't take the time to understand that landscape, to learn how social media works, what language it uses, what codes circulate there, we're gonna keep falling behind. Jamie asks about his family, and Bryony tells him that his dad is doing well, but he's sad to see Jamie in that place. Jamie says he shouldn't be there and asks Bryony to get him out, but she replies that she can't. Jamie stands up, agitated. Bryony tells him to sit down or she'll have to leave. Jamie snaps. He throws the hot chocolate and yells that she can't make him sit or control his life. The guards step in and Jamie calms down. He apologizes to Bryony, who says she'll go get a cup of tea. When she returns, Jamie promises to behave better. Bryony wants to understand how Jamie feels about girls. She asks about his parents, but Jamie says his dad was always kind to his mom and doesn't talk to other women. Bryony then asks Jamie directly. He says he doesn't have any female friends, but would like to have a girlfriend. Then, Jamie starts inventing stories about sexual encounters with girls, but quickly clarifies that none of it actually happened. The only thing that did happen was that he saw photos of 2 girls from his class, and everyone saw them. His expression suggests that Katie was one of them. Bryony asks if he was attracted to Katie, but he says she wasn't his type. He explains Katie sent the photo to Fidget because she liked him and asked for it and then forwarded it. And now, Fidget won't be getting the photos from any other girls because he didn't handle it carefully. When Bascom learned what the word incel meant, he was surprised to see that Jamie, just 13 years old, was already so concerned with having sexual experiences. And many people share that same reaction. But what we often forget is that during adolescence, there is an enormous need to fit in, to belong. And if, within the group of boys, the idea of being a man means having a sexual experience, then many feel like they have to go through with it, because if they don't, they're excluded. That's why often, this anxiety in teenagers isn't so much about the desire to have sex itself, but the desire to belong. In fact, when we hear Jamie inventing stories about sexual encounters during the session with Bryony, he was doing it precisely to maintain an image within the male universe. And this happens far more often than we think. Things like requesting or sharing intimate photos of women, making sexualized comments, bragging about how many girls you've been with, often have little to do with the real desire for those girls and much more to do with performance in front of other men. They don't ask for the photo to look at it. They ask for it to share it. They're not with someone for genuine pleasure, but to talk about it afterwards, to score points in that invisible ranking that supposedly makes you more of a man, to be admired and accepted by other men. Because in their minds, if they don't, they're less. But maybe what makes you more of a man has nothing to do with any of that. Maybe all that's doing is turning you into someone hollow, or cruel, or simply someone who doesn't know who he is without others' approval. And maybe being more of a man today means learning to say no to what doesn't sit right with you. It means choosing to be a good person rather than just a real man. The psychologist asks if he thinks girls are attracted to him. Jamie replies no, because he's ugly. She asks how that makes him feel, and he complains for not telling him he isn't. Bryony explains what matters is what he believes. Jamie brings up the other psychologist who evaluates him, saying it's easier because he just asks if Jamie understands what he did. As he says it, he seems to realize he's just confessed to the crime and bursts into anger. Bryony, visibly tense, asks him to sit down. Another trait we notice in Jamie is his outbursts of anger. His only way of dealing with frustration and rage is through violence. When he feels overwhelmed, he doesn't know how to express it, and he explodes. He's a boy carrying a lot of bottled up anger and frustration, and he has no emotional tools to release it more healthily. And at home, he never found spaces where he could learn how. His closest male role model, Eddie, doesn't know how either. As we'll later discover, Eddie grew up in a very tough environment, with a father who used to beat him. On top of that, he inherited the traditional masculine expectations of his generation, which hardened him even more. He's not affectionate, doesn't talk about his feelings, and when he gets frustrated, he also uses violence. His pain comes out through shouting and impulses, and that, unintentionally, also sends a message to Jamie. And this raises a very important issue, one that affects many men. Many of us don't know how to deal with our emotions. We're taught from a young age to suck it up, not to cry, and to be strong. We became so hardened that, in many cases, we disconnected from our emotions entirely. Some men don't even know how to name what they're feeling. And if we can't name what we feel, we can't understand it, let alone manage it. So when something hurts or frustrates you, the easiest or only thing left is to explode. I don't believe being a man means not feeling. I don't believe staying silent makes you stronger. On the contrary, I believe that not knowing how to deal with your emotions doesn't make you more of a man. It makes you a more wounded person. But when you learn to face what you feel, when you dare to look inward and understand yourself, even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable, you gain self-control and freedom. You become a better person, a better father, better brother, friend, and partner. Jamie answers more questions. He says he's not popular and that he, Tommy, and Ryan were bullied, verbally and physically. When Bryony shows him the comments Katie left on Instagram and asks about the emojis, Jamie gets defensive and tries to intimidate her, saying she should be ashamed of being afraid of a 13-year-old boy. Bryony doesn't react and continues asking until he gives in. He tells her Katie called him an incel, and one of the emojis referred to the 80-20 rule. 80% of women go for 20% of men. Bryony points out many people liked Katie's comments. When she asks why he thinks she did that, Jamie repeats, "Because I'm ugly." He then explains all he did was ask her out after the photo incident, thinking she'd be feeling vulnerable and maybe she'd start liking him. He invited her to the fair, but Katie told him she wasn't that desperate, and after that came the emojis. Jamie admits he had a knife and says with a hint of pride, "I didn't touch her," adding that others might have. Another trait we observe in Jamie is his intelligence. From the very first episode, we saw that Jamie is a very smart boy. We noticed it when the lawyer asked him what his favorite subject was, and he responded by talking about the Industrial Revolution and giving well-thought-out reasons for why a certain historical figure was his favorite. That already showed he had critical thinking and analytical skills, but that same intelligence is used in a much more calculated and manipulative way. Just look at how he's managed the entire situation from the beginning. His way of speaking, his demeanor, everything is deliberate. Even as viewers, we find ourselves doubting for a moment whether he really committed the crime. His expression mixes fear and confusion, but he never fully breaks down. We've now learned that he invited Katie to the fair right after her intimate photos were leaked. He did so knowing, or at least believing, that she would be in a vulnerable state. It was a premeditated move. Also, during the police interrogation, even when shown the video of the crime, Jamie denied it again and again. And with the psychologist, it's been the same. He's never directly admitted what he did. Instead, he tries to steer the conversation elsewhere, avoid certain topics, and provoke. One moment that made this especially clear just happened when Bryony tried to discuss the meaning of the emojis. Jamie, instead of responding, told her she should be ashamed of being afraid of a 13-year-old boy. He did this to throw her off, to regain control of the situation. I believe Jamie, in fact, uses his intelligence as a defense, as a way to survive in a world where he feels he doesn't have much going for him. If we remember, he himself said he's ugly, that he's not popular, he doesn't stand a chance with girls. He believes he has no value, physically or socially. So he clings to the one thing that he thinks he does have, his ability to analyze, to anticipate, manipulate if necessary. And from there, He tries to regain some sense of control in a world that's hostile to him. And if we add the influence of incel discourse, which, as Adam explained, promotes the idea that the only way most men can attract a woman is through deceit or manipulation, then it becomes a little clearer why Jamie uses his intelligence so strategically. That discourse validates his way of behaving, even if it causes harm. Of course, it's not the only cause, but it can be a factor that reinforces this way of relating to the world. Bryony informs him that this will be their last session, which upsets Jamie. He doesn't want her to leave. He asks if she likes him, but Bryony avoids answering. Jamie insists on knowing what she thinks of him, growing more agitated, until he has another outburst, and the guard is forced to remove him. Jamie had chosen his dad as his responsible adult at the start of the case because, in his words, he was kind and didn't judge him. And that phrase tells us a lot about what Jamie needed, someone who wouldn't judge him. I believe Bryony made him feel something very similar. From the very beginning, we see her bring him hot chocolate. And for Jamie, that means a great deal, because someone thought about him. Throughout their sessions, Bryony never judges him, never lectures him, never reacts with outrage. She just listens and stays with him, even when Jamie throws out provocations. And if we think about it, those provocations might be Jamie's way of testing her, trying to confirm what he's always known, that people will reject him. But she didn't leave. She didn't get angry or take the bait. She stayed, and that consistency might have given Jamie the sense that she accepted him. That's likely why he broke down when she told him it was their last session. He was losing the one person who, in the middle of a hostile environment, offered him something resembling emotional refuge. And it's also important to note that Bryony is a woman. Jamie, who had felt completely rejected by women, carried twisted beliefs about them, believed he would never be wanted by one, suddenly found a woman who didn't treat him with disdain, didn't mock him, and who actually listened. That's why he kept pushing to know what she thought of him, because he was trying to hold on to the idea that finally he'd been accepted by a woman. More than a year later, Eddie celebrates his 50th birthday with his family, who seem to have regained some sense of normalcy, until Lisa returns and tells them someone spray-painted the word nonce, a British insult meaning pedophile, on Eddie's van. Manda has been insisting they move to Liverpool to start over, but Eddie refuses, saying they haven't done anything wrong. Eddie tries to clean the van using soap and a sponge, without success. So he decides to go to the hardware store to buy supplies and asks Manda and Lisa to come with him. On the way, Eddie tries to salvage the day. He puts on music and suggests doing something as a family after the store. Manda plays along, and Lisa also shows a good attitude. They make plans to go home, change, watch a movie, and have Chinese food for dinner. When they arrive at the hardware store, Eddie's told the only way to remove the graffiti is to repaint the whole van. He gets worried because he can't afford it, so just buy some blue paint to cover the slur. As they leave, he spots some boys he recognizes as the culprits and chases them down with rage. He grabs one of them forcefully and yells that you don't do that to people and that you have no idea what I'm going through. He shoves him to the ground before walking away. Afterward, he throws the paint over the van to cover the graffiti, which causes trouble with store employees due to the mess. On the way home, Jamie calls from prison to wish his dad a happy birthday, then tells him he's thinking of pleading guilty. Eddie falls silent. Manda and Lisa speak, but quickly change the subject. Back at home, Manda breaks down in tears, and they decide to cancel their trip to the movies. She then talks with Eddie about Jamie. Manda remembers how he would always come in, slam the door, and lock himself in his room in front of the computer, with the light on until the early morning. She would ask him to go to sleep, and he'd just turn off the light without saying a word. Eddie replies there wasn't much more they could do. Manda confesses that sometimes she thinks they should have seen something and stopped it. Eddie tells her they can't blame themselves, that thinking like that doesn't help, but Manda insists they raised him. Eddie recalls how his own father used to beat him when he was Jamie's age, and that he swore he would never do that to his kids. And he didn't. He just wanted to be better, but now he's not sure he was. He took Jamie to football, thinking it would make him stronger, but Jamie wasn't any good, and other parents mocked him. Manda tells him that Jamie idolized him. Eddie continues. He took him to boxing. He thought that would help, but Jamie lasted only 10 minutes. He remembers that Jamie liked to draw, and he was good at it, but one day he stopped. Then he asked for a computer, and they bought it for him. He recalls playing football with him, but then the business took off, and Eddie started working from 6 in the morning to 8 at night. Manda says she used to get home earlier, but even then, she didn't know what to do. Eddie tells her she was a good mother, that maybe he was the one who neglected Jamie a bit. They thought Jamie was safe in his room. What harm could he do in there? They believed they were doing the right thing. Manda says yes, she was a good mother, and Eddie was a great father, but in the end, they raised Jamie. Eddie wonders if they should have done more. Manda replies that maybe the best thing would be to accept that yes, they could have done more. At that moment, Lisa walks in dressed up. She says there's no better occasion to look nice than her dad's birthday. Eddie apologizes for what happened in the hardware store parking lot, but Lisa tells him not to worry. She then says that a lot of people treat her badly for being Jamie's sister, but she doesn't want to move. She says if they'll leave, they'll only be fine for a little while, until someone finds out. The family decides to stay in, watch a movie, and order food. Lisa goes downstairs to set the table. Eddie asks Manda how they raised Lisa, and she replies, the same way we raised Jamie. Later, Eddie goes into his son's room. He collapses onto the bed and breaks down. He screams into the pillow, and in the end, gently covers Jamie's teddy bear and says, I should have done better. Could they have done something better? I think that's one of the hardest questions the series leaves us with, and I appreciate that it doesn't offer a simple answer. We're not shown a psychopath or a boy with a severe clinical diagnosis, nor are we shown violent or neglectful parents. We're shown an ordinary family, loving parents who, within their limits, tried to do their best. They raised both of their children the same way, but Jamie ended up finding comfort and a sense of belonging in an online group built on hate. And the truth is, there are no guarantees. You don't need to have a terrible childhood for something like this to happen, or for something to be broken in the family. Sometimes it just happens. Because today, social media and technology have enormous influence on how kids form their identities. And if we adults aren't paying attention, if we're not genuinely interested in the world they live in, what they think or feel, then that space is taken over by the internet. So what could have been done better? Maybe something key was the emotional disconnection in the home. It's not that there was no love, because love was there. But what was missing were real spaces for conversation, for asking questions without judgment, talking about feelings and thoughts. That wasn't there. And that happens in many families. We prefer to avoid discomfort and pretend everything's fine. In the last episode, we see that. The family seems to live in an emotional denial. Someone had just spray painted a vicious word on Eddie's van, and he tried to carry on as if nothing happened, until he snapped in the parking lot. And when Jamie called from prison to say he was going to plead guilty, no one knew what to say. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't know how to deal with it. And maybe that's another message, that it's not about finding someone to blame. It's about asking the right questions. How are we showing up for our children? Are we asking them how they feel? Are we giving them real spaces to talk about deep things without fear of being judged? Maybe we could all try a little more of that. To ask, to talk, to listen without judgment. Maybe we won't always have the answers, but sometimes just being there is already so much more than we think. Maybe that's something we could all try to do better.